ranking Pokemon types, a tradition as old as the internet itself. When it comes to favorites, we can argue till the milk tank come home. I don't think there's really any right or wrong answers, but when it comes to objective strength, I think we can at least attempt to create some sort of tier list. So the first question we have to ask ourselves is, what in the world are we actually ranking these types based on? Is a type good because it resists a lot of types? Is it good because it beats a lot of types? Is a type good because the moves of that type are good? Or is it good because the Pokemon of that type are good? Are we talking about in-game? Are we talking about competitive? Not to mention that types have been rebalanced or added throughout the game's history, so when are we even talking about? That's a lot of stuff we gotta think about. With all that in mind, I'm gonna be evaluating these types using a word you probably hate if you've ever applied to US colleges. I'm gonna be looking at them holistically, which means I'm gonna try and consider all aspects of the type and the game that they're in. But keep in mind that because the scope of this question is so huge, there is a lot of room for debate. I think you could argue most placements on this list up or down, at least a tier, if not more, based on what criteria you value. With two notable exceptions, which I think will be pretty obvious once we actually get into the list. I'd say that this tier list will end up mostly concerning competitive performance, specifically competitive singles, because that is the format I like and am most familiar with. If you want an in-game type tier list, I've actually prepared one for you. Here it is. There's the Surf tier, just spam Surf, teach it to all your Pokemon, win the game. It's a really easy game for kids, where the main strategy is just spam attack until you win, and any of these types can do that pretty well, and these three types at the bottom suck at attacking, so they're really bad in-game. If there's interest in a full, in-depth, in-game type tier list, I might make one, but I don't really think there's a point. This is all you need to know. Attack with any of these types and you'll probably win. So what are the tiers? Well, at the very tippy top, we have the S for Steel tier. It's gonna be Steel types, and the other types that are almost as good, but not quite as good as Steel. These are the meta-defining types. They are the best. They're gonna be on every single team, so you better be prepared to deal with them. Probably with the types in A tier. These are types that are strong in their own right, and also probably match up well against the tippy top types. Then in B, you have sort of just average types. They exist, and they have pros and cons. And then at the bottom, you have the C tier. These types are, you're not too happy when you see them on the status screen. It doesn't mean that Pokemon of these types can never be good, but they've got an uphill battle to fight, let's put it that way. Final part of the preamble before we get into the actual tiering, but if you want to tell me directly that I'm wrong, or if you want to use any of the weird Michael Phelps or Doge edits that you'll see throughout this video...
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Join my Discord, The Cellar, link in the description. Thank you very much. Let's get started. Alright, we are gonna kick things off, not with the fighting type, but with two picks that I think are fairly uncontroversial. I'm sure the comments will prove me wrong, but I think most people can agree that Steel is the absolute best type in the game, and that Ice is the absolute worst. Womp womp. Why is that? Explanation to follow right now. So why is Steel the best? Well, if you look at the left side of your screen, you should see a few things pop up. So for each of these types, I am going to be showing their type chart, so how they match up against other types. I'm going to be showing the average fully evolved stats of the type. This is mostly for fun, it's not really a meaningful metric. And I'm also going to be showing what I consider special traits of the type, either positive or negative. Things that might not be apparent based on a look at the type chart, but I think are worth noting. What should be obvious based on a glance at the type chart is that Steel is invincible. Like, what in the world were they thinking when they were balancing this? So it resists Bug, Dragon, Fairy, Flying, Grass, Ice, Normal, Psychic, Rock, Steel, and it's completely immune to Poison. How do you beat these things? I think Rock was supposed to be the OG defensive type. That didn't work out, and when they were designing Steel, and they asked what type should it resist, they just said yes. And all of this fair and balanced typing is after Steel got nerfed in Gen 6. It used to resist Ghost and Dark as well, but they took those away. Fortunately, they added in a Fairy resistance and an offensive advantage against Fairy, and Fairy, spoilers, is pretty good. Offensively, it's not great. It's kind of mediocre. Pretty much the best thing I can say is that it's good against Fairy, and that nothing is immune to it, but overall, like, pretty mediocre offensively. And if you're familiar with my tier list, you might be thinking, like, wait, is this the same guy? The guy who won't shut up about how offense is everything and defense doesn't matter? Why does he think Steel is the best type in the game? Well, for that, we gotta take a look at in-game versus competitive. In-game, they try to disguise it a bit, but you have a massive advantage over the AI opponents. You really gotta try to lose. You can use better Pokemon with better moves. You can just out-level the opponents. You have access to effort value stat boosts that the AI just doesn't. You can use healing items if you're so inclined, which means that if you're not getting 2-hit KO'd, you're basically invincible. Most AI opponents use monotype teams that you can really easily prepare for. Really, the only time the game even tries to beat you is during the champion battle. And even then, the champions all handicap themselves. Like, all the Daipa kids cry about how tough Cynthia is. Imagine how much worse the crying would be if her Garchomp had a real move instead of Dragon Rush. In the end, the game wants you to beat it, so the best strategy basically ends up being get really strong and one-shot everything. In competitive, all of those behind-the-scenes advantages that let you one-shot the opponent's entire team are gone. So you're probably not going to be doing much one-shotting at all. You might not even be doing some two-shotting, which means that if you're getting hit, defenses do matter. One of the main ways you can win a competitive battle is by powering yourself up. How do you do that? Well, you use one of these moves. You might encounter them in your in-game playthrough. Swords Dance, Dragon Dance, a lot of dances that raise your stats. You probably ignored those moves because, I mean, they don't do any damage, so what's the point? But in competitive, those stat boosts give you the leg up on your opponents that then lets you, the term is sweep right through their team. Only problem is, your opponent is not there to watch you dance, right? They're gonna hit you as you're dancing, and then you're probably gonna die. A lot of what happens in a competitive battle is trying to create a situation where you can boost your stats without dying. And nothing creates that situation better than just being a Steel type. Steel basically lets you turn defense into offense because your enemy hits you. You don't die because you probably resist whatever they used. Then you boost up your stats and you win! You can basically take Steel, slap it on any other type, and suddenly you're amazing. Almost any other type. And of course, if you are a Pokemon like, say, Bronzong or Ferrothorn, whose main purpose is to withstand attacks, then you can't do any better than Steel. You resist everything, and the poison immunity is really important because poison, specifically toxic poison, is one of the main ways you force walls out, and you just can't do that to Steel types. They're completely immune. You're also immune to the damage from Sandstorm, or as it says here, Sandstrum, sorry about that. And you have a Stealth Rock resistance, which is really important. If you don't know what Stealth Rock is, it's what's called an entry hazard, so basically you use the move, and then when your opponent sends a Pokemon in, they take damage. And Stealth Rock deals damage based on your resistance to Rock. So because Steel resists Rock, you only take 6% of your health. Not bad. But if you're weak to Rock, like say Fire, you lose 25% of your health. Huge difference. So resisting Stealth Rock, really, really good. Being Steel type does come with a downside. It makes you uniquely vulnerable to Magnet Pull, which I think is hilarious, because if there was an ability that said, I don't know, like, Rock types can't switch out, you'd be like, is that a joke? Who cares? But because Magnet Pull traps Steel specifically, and Steel is so overpowered, Magnet Pull is considered a good ability. Now, you might have been scratching your head a bit throughout this, because I've been talking about how invincible Steel is, but if you look at the weaknesses, fighting fire and ground, well, they're absolutely everywhere. Like, what team doesn't run attacks of those types? How can Steel be so good if its weaknesses are so common? And to understand why that doesn't really matter, we gotta think one step ahead. But before we can do that, we gotta think about 100 years back. It's World War I, and the British High Command has decided that instead of issuing cloth caps, not really sure what good that was doing, they are gonna start issuing steel helmets. So they knew, even back then, steel, pretty good. But then they noticed, to their horror, that after issuing better helmets, the rate of head injuries went up. What? Well, are better helmets causing head injuries? Of course not. So what actually happened was, previously, soldiers would get hit in the head, and they would die. But now, because they have the better helmets, they get hit in the head, and they would just get a head injury. then go home and start saying crazy things like Sword and Shield was a good game. The point is that, yeah, Steel's weaknesses are really common. But you gotta look a little further. They're really common because Steel is really good. And these types beat Steel. Like here it says Fighting, Fire, and Ground, which, I mean, they're respectable in their own right, but pretty much anything Steel is weak to is gonna start popping up everywhere. Ooh. That was a lot of words to say. Steel good. From the tippy top, straight to the very bottom, it is Ice. Oof. Now, Ice is one of those types that seems to have a lot of fans online. I often hear like, oh, Ice is so underrated. No, it's pretty accurately rated. It sucks. Offensively, of course, Ice is pretty good. It's no slouch at all. I'd probably put it an A. But defensively, Ice is unacceptable. It is so bad. Like, I know looking at the time chart you can see, oh, 1 resistance, 4 weaknesses. I mean, that's bad, but it's not that bad. Oh, it is that bad. Basically, if you're an Ice type and you get hit, you're gonna explode. Sometimes even if you don't get hit because you're Stealth Rock weak, so you're gonna be taking massive damage just switching in. For some reason, Game Freak keeps making these, like, slow, bulky Ice types, bulky in big air quotes, because it's really hard to be bulky when you take at least double damage from basically everything. You'll notice that 2 of your weaknesses, Fire and Fighting, overlap with Steel, so you know that they're already on every team, and just as a free bonus, they destroy you. To be usable as an Ice type, you gotta be really fast and really strong. So, Weavile, I guess, and Mamoswine, it's not that fast, but it is really strong, and Ice Shard usually goes first. Those are a lot of criteria to still get bullet punched by Scizor and die before you can do anything, unfortunately. As for Ice's special traits, it's immune to freeze. That's something. I don't have it listed on here, but it's also immune to sheer cold. And you get an accuracy boost when using it. It's more accurate to say you don't get a penalty. Any non-Ice type that uses Sheer Cold only has a baseline 20% chance to hit, but Ice types, you get the full 30% chance. But Sheer Cold is a horrible move, so who cares? In keeping with the theme of Ice being awful, their unique weather condition Hail is by far the worst. That's not even a debate. It barely does anything, so it makes Blizzard fully accurate. That's nice, I guess. It lets you use Aurora Veil, which actually is a very good move, but not good enough to save the type, unfortunately. And the sort of passive thing it does is it deals 6% health a turn to all non-Ice types, but that's so restrictive. Like, unless you're running almost mono Ice, you're also going to be getting hurt by Hail, so like, what's the point? And of course, if you're in the situation where your team doesn't take Hail damage, but your opponent's team does, well, good news is, you're saving 6% health a turn. Bad news is, you're gonna lose because your opponent isn't using awful Ice types. So they're just gonna beat you. Things weren't always so grim for Ice. Once upon a time, meaning Gen 1, it was actually fine. Fire didn't resist Ice, Steel didn't even exist. And Blizzard, for some reason, was 90% accurate. I don't know what they were thinking with that. And in Green, it actually had a 30% chance to freeze, which was a 1-hit KO back then. So it was basically 120 base power, 90 accuracy, with a free 1-hit KO move. Ridiculous. And Ice used to be the dragon-killing type. It has since been usurped by fairies. Unfortunately, which just does it so much better. Although there still are quite a few dragons that have a quadruple weakness to Ice. Regarding Ice as the dragon killer type, I'm gonna weeb out for a bit here, so if you're not interested in that, you can skip to the next type using the time codes below, but if you're sticking around, in the Nintendo DS game, Pokemon Conquest, the main villain of the game is the warlord Oda Nobunaga, whose objective is to unite, definitely not Japan, using the might of his Zekrom and his Shining Rayquaza. He is the Dragon-type specialist of the game, and he's really strong. This game takes place back when Gen 5 was fresh. Oda Nobunaga was a real dude who attempted to unite the then warring states of Japan, and he did really well, especially considering that he didn't have either Zekrom or Rayquaza there to help him. He got a really good start, but before his ambition could be realized, he was betrayed by one of his allies, a man named Mitsuhide. So Mitsuhide cornered him and basically forced him into a terrible situation. He said either, I can kill you, or you can preserve your honor by taking your own life. and Oda Nobunaga, he did the honorable thing, and he did himself in. I mention all of this because Mitsuhide is also a character in Pokemon Conquest, and he's the ice specialist. He uses Articuno specifically. Very cool. Nobunaga's successor, and the dude who would eventually end up uniting most of what we call Japan today, was a dude named Hideyoshi. I think it's the same Hide as in my mom's name, Hideka. Oh, are we related? Probably not. He's the fire-type specialist, and eventually, he's the one who gets to use Reshiram in that game. Really cool. You should play it. And as an extra to the extra, when I was doing my study abroad in Kyoto, I was just walking through pretty much the center of town with a guide from the university I was studying at. We passed a shrine. I asked the guide, hey, what's significant about this place? And they said, like, real casually, oh, that's where famous warlord Oda Nobunaga was cornered by Mitsuhide and forced to take his own life. Anyway, what do you want to eat for lunch? Go to Kyoto. It's a really cool place, if you get the chance. Back to ice types. Yeah, since Gen 2 and the introduction of Steel type, it's just been a real sad state of affairs for ice. Honestly, the best ice type in the game is, like, Greninja, and that's because it's an ice type when it attacks, so it gets the stab bonus, and then it can switch to anything else before it actually gets hit. Ice, it ain't nice. The bug type, also really weak, although this time I think it's by design, at least. Especially in generations 1 to 4, Bug was sort of depicted as this much weaker early game type that gets overshadowed by stronger types later on. And then in Generation 4, and definitely in Generation 5, Game Freak decided to be a little bit more generous. They're like, alright, Bug types can have actual stats, they can have some good moves, let's see if they can do anything. Defensively, Bug is nothing spectacular, it's okay, but the Stealth Rock weakness really sucks. Offensively, it's a disaster. Like, what is this? Resisted by Fairy, resisted by Fighting, resisted by Fire, Flying, Ghost, Poison, Steel. You think that's enough? Like, the cruelest thing in here is Fairy, because Fairy was added in Generation 6, so, like, they looked at everything else that resisted Bug, and they're like, yeah, Fairy should also resist Bug. Have some mercy, why don't you? Oh, if it's any consolation to Bug-type fans, I, in real life, am really terrified of bugs. Like, I think they're really scary. And I guess other good things about bugs, people like watching them on YouTube, I guess? Thanks, bug types. I wouldn't be here without you. Creepy. Dark type, added in Generation 2 to help rein in those psychic type nerds who ruled the entire metagame. I think Dark is a very average type overall. Nothing too great about it, nothing too bad about it either. Its unique trait, Prankster immunity, is really cool. There is an ability called Prankster that quite a few Pokemon have, and what it does is it gives priority to all of your non-damaging moves. So if you try to use, say, Stun Spore, regardless of your speed stat, you're probably going to go first, unless the opponent also uses, like, an increased priority move, like, say, Quick Attack or Extreme Speed. If you're a Dark type, the Prankster ability just doesn't affect you. It's not even a prank, bro. And when I say it doesn't affect you, I don't mean that Prankster Pokemon don't get priority on their moves. I mean, they choose the move, and then it fizzles. It doesn't do anything. They waste your turn. So it's a minor thing, but if you're against a Prankster Pokemon, Dark types have a really nice innate advantage. Dark definitely took a hit when our Fairy-type overlords joined in Generation 6, but I think even considering that, it's a perfectly fine type, especially with how powerful Knockoff is. Knockoff is basically everywhere. You almost always want to be knocking off, and if you're a Dark type, your knockoffs are 50% stronger. And that's the real thing. Does that work? Knockoff, real thing? I mean, okay, we're going to the next type. Dragon type. No surprises here, but Dragon is an S tier type. It is right up there with Steel. And I know I said I wouldn't really be considering average stat totals in this, but just look at the average stat total for Dragon. It is over 600. And for reference, 600 is Garchomp. Garchomp is below average when it comes to Dragon types. How ridiculous is that? Back in my day, Dragon type used to be for the elites only, okay? We had to swim upstream both ways, then up a waterfall, and we still didn't get to be a Dragon type. Nowadays, they let anyone in. How far we have fallen. Defensively, Dragon is pretty darn good, especially pre-Gen 6. So you get 3 great resistances to electric, fire, and water, and also resistance to grass. I mean, I won't say no. Offensively, Dragon is deceptively good. So you'll notice that it's only super effective against Dragon, and it's resisted by Steel, and Fairy's completely immune, so you kind of lose out on the math there. I mean, that doesn't seem that good. But with stats like these, basically, if the opponent doesn't resist you, they're in huge trouble. So sort of how you would play Dragon types in Gen 4 and 5 before they added Fairy was, you send out your Dragon after you eliminate your opponent's Steel type, and then nothing can stop you, because your stats are so high that even though they're not actually weak to your attack, they still die. Dragons, really, really good. Fairies definitely knock them down a peg, but I think they still pretty much rule the roost. I can speak English. Electric type. I'd say this is kind of a secret Chad type. I think most people are aware that electric is good, but they're not aware of just how good. I think this actually goes in A. It's never really been an oppressive type. I don't think people are crying out, like, Lord Masada, please deliver us from the Pika clones. But at high levels of play, things are always getting zapped. Thunderbolt's really good. It's everywhere, and the typing itself is also pretty respectable. Notably, you zap water types, and water types are everywhere and really strong. Thunderbolt is one of the best ways to get through them. You're weak to only one type. Unfortunately, that type is ground, which means earthquake, which is absolutely everywhere, but hey, you can't have everything. Unless you have levitate, hashtag Electros things. And as of Gen 6, electric types as a type perk are completely immune to the paralysis status, which is really nice. Even though paralysis has been nerfed to only reduce speed by 50%, being completely immune to a status condition is nice. I'm giving electric overall an A. Make it a double A. A triple A. I don't know if the batteries add more A's after. We're going to the next type. It's late here, so I can't be too loud, but fairies! Crocker was right to be obsessed with these things. They are OP, OP, OP. I don't even think the wish-granting fairies from Fairly Odd Parents were as powerful as the ones in Pokemon. These things are obscene. Fairy was added in Generation 6 to counter the best types at the time, which were Dragon and Fighting. And it turns out when you add in a type that counters the best types, it becomes one of the new best types. The big draw of Fairy, of course, is that it completely shuts down Dragon, which is a really powerful type in its own right. And it does so without really incurring any penalties, like, you're weak to Poison and Steel, so you're weak to Steel because Poison sucks. Hey, post-production imported cheese here. I just wanted to stress how big of a deal it is that Fairy is immune to Dragon instead of just resistant. When it comes to Dragon, we're talking about some of the strongest attacks in the game from some of the strongest Pokemon in the game. So even if that damage is cut in half by resistance, that might just mean losing one Pokemon to Outrage instead of 2 or 3. Complete immunity is just so much better, it's incredible. One of the only things holding Fairy type back is that the fairies themselves are like kinda eh? I mean, they're no dragons, we'll put it that way. Fairy overall, just a ridiculous typing in its own right, and if you combine it with Steel, the other best type in the game, what do you get? Banned, apparently. Really, really good type. Fighting type, a true underdog story. So in Generation 1, Fighting is possibly the worst typing of all time. It's either that or Generation 1 Poison. It is awful. You think Modern Ice is bad? Gen 1 Fighting makes Modern Ice look like friggin' Titanium type. The Gen 1 Fighting type was an unfunny joke. You got completely destroyed by the Psychic types, which were everywhere. And the best Fighting type move in the game was like High Jump Kick on Hitmonlee, which had like 80 base power. Wow. Starting in Generation 2, things start to get better. Steel was added, and Fighting does have an advantage against Steel. And one of the only ways you could hope to get past High Lord Snorlax was to send out your Machamp and hope that your Cross Chop crit him and took him out. Probably not, though. You're still gonna lose. But I mean, you could at least try. By the time Generation 4 rolled around, Fighting was pretty good. You got great moves like Close Combat added, great animation. And Machamp, of course, was dynamic punching people left and right. No miss with that no guard. Very nice. Lucario, another very good fighting type. And then Generation 5 happened. I have no idea what was going on at Game Freak HQ. My theory is this. So here in Japan, if you're employed, you have to go to government-mandated health checks at least once a year. It's nothing like fancy, but it's just an overall, like, physical. And my guess is that Mr. Masuda, he didn't like what he saw in his health report, so everyone at the Game Freak office to the gym, protein shakes on your desks, lifting weights as you're typing out the code because Gen 5 went nuts on the fighting types. So many of them that were so strong. Like the entire Gen 5 meta was basically buff dudes on dragons, punching steel types. Gen 5 fighting types were really out of hand, and remember, we got 4 hands, so things were really crazy. It was ridiculous. It's probably a large part of the reason why in Generation 6, they're like, hey, we gotta stop this. We're gonna take out the dragons, and we're also gonna put a check on these buff dudes. We gotta stop their gains, because they're out of control. I'd say fighting type nowadays is in a pretty good spot. I would say it's definitely an A-type tier. Basically, you punch things, and you have a reasonable chance of doing a lot of damage to them. Very good offensive type, and not bad defensively. Fighting, bro fists. I gotta make sure this actually goes to the camera. Nice, there we go. Fire type, my personal favorite type, although I promise that's not gonna affect the rating. Fire in Gen 1, pretty bad. Let's be real, it wasn't great. But in Generation 2, it got a massive buff called Steel type. Steel, the best type in the game, tends to lean physically defensive, while Fire tends to lean specially offensive. Combine that with the fact that a lot of popular Steel type combos, like Steel Bug, Steel Grass, Steel Flying, don't actually negate the Fire weakness. They actually make you more vulnerable to Fire. All that means that Fire is one of the best ways to get through Steel types, which are everywhere, so Fire types are always going to have stuff to do. I'm going to put Fire in B. It's pretty good. It's worth noting that Fire actually has the second most resistances of any type behind Steel. Fire actually has 6 resistances, but unfortunately those weaknesses are pretty rough. Particularly the Stealth Rock weakness is a really, really big deal. But the Fire type perks are also not half bad. You are immune to burn, which is one of the main ways you can stop physical attackers. Can't do that to Fire types. They're completely immune. Very nice. And you also get some benefit from Sun. Sun powers up your Fire moves by 50%, which is very nice, while also turning the water weakness into just water neutrality. But unfortunately, Chlorophyll, the ability that actually boosts your speed in Sun and allows you to sweep, is usually found on grass types. So that's a bit of a bummer. Fire overall, pretty hot, but I mean, people online, they're not your average Charizard enjoyer, so I think if I put Fire any higher, people are gonna get really, really incensed in the comments, so we'll leave it in B, just for you guys. Flying, I think this might actually be the most balanced type in the game. There's a ton of good flying types, there's also a ton of bad flying types. And most of flying's advantages and disadvantages are very flavorfully tied to the mechanic of being a flying Pokemon. So as a flying Pokemon, you are immune to grounded hazards. Grounded hazards are ones like spikes, toxic spikes, sticky web that are on the ground, and you're not, so they just don't affect you. But as a trade-off, those pesky, sneaky pebbles, they're in the air, and they can clip your wings. They take 25% of your health. Watch out for those. You're immune to Arena Trap, which is an ability that prevents grounded opponents from switching out. Dugtrio has this ability, but you're not on the ground, so it doesn't affect you, which is a nice bonus. And a big one is that you are immune to Earthquake. Earthquake is one of the best moves in the game. It is everywhere, and in almost every competitive battle, you are going to see the text, X Pokemon used Earthquake. Y Pokemon is not affected because they're flying type. Guaranteed in almost every single battle. I listed this as a downside, but it's pretty niche. Your flying state can actually be removed by certain moves like Smackdown, 1,000 Arrows, Gravity, all ground you and make you vulnerable to ground type moves and hazards. You can also remove the flying state yourself by using the move Roost, although this is usually an advantage. And also, while you're flying, certain terrain effects cannot benefit you. So you can't heal from grassy terrain or benefit from the sleep immunity of electric terrain or the status protection of misty terrain. Although you still benefit from the offensive boost that those terrains provide. It's kind of hard to keep up with. Flying, I'm going to say it soars into the B tier. Below Fire. B for bird. Not bad at all. It's a ghost, and a good type, it goes in A. Ghosts are really good. If you look at the type chart, you've got an immunity to fighting, and fists are flying, so that is pretty much always going to be useful. And offensively, you'll notice that there's only one resist, Dark, which means that you can basically just spam ghost moves and probably do a lot of damage. I know normal types are immune, but who cares? Normal types are spoiler, pretty bad. It's worth noting that Ghost actually combines with fighting to hit absolutely every Pokemon in the game for at least neutral. Keep that in mind. Ghosts have quite a few special traits. Perhaps the most powerful is that they cannot be trapped. That means trapping moves like Spiderweb or Mean Look don't work, and trapping abilities like Arena Trap and Shadow Tag also don't work. Fun fact about Shadow Tag, so the Japanese name of it is Kagefumi, which means like to step on a shadow, which apparently binds you in place. It's basically what Shikamaru from Naruto does. Really cool, and I don't think Shadow Tag really conveys that in English. It kind of sounds like you're on a playground playing tag, but Shadow, I guess. Being trapped is one of the worst things that can happen to you in a competitive match, which might not be apparent if you only play casual, because the AI almost never switches. They basically just throw their hands up and say, well, I guess I'll die. But in competitive, if an opponent is at a disadvantage, they're not going to stay there and let you take them out. They're going to switch. And you will also want to do the same. So preventing that with trapping moves is really powerful. And preventing being trapped just by being a ghost type, really nice perk. Ghost types, as a consequence of being immune to normal, can also block the move Rapid Spin. So Rapid Spin is a normal type move that removes all entry hazards. So that means Stealth Rocks, Spikes, Toxic Spikes, all gone if the opponent manages to Rapid Spin. But if you send in your Ghost type, you're immune to the normal type move Rapid Spin, so Rapid Spin fails, and your hazards stay up. This isn't really a positive or a negative, but the move Curse has a different effect when used by ghost types. Normally, it just drops your speed by 1 stage and raises your attack and defense by 1 each, but if used by a ghost type, you sacrifice 50% of your HP to curse the opponent, who will then lose 25% of their HP a turn until they switch out. Generally, this is kind of bad, but there might be cases where this is useful. I don't know, you can't really say it's good or bad. If you're wondering why Curse behaves this way, it has to do with the Japanese name of the move. So Curse in Japanese is Noroi. But it could also mean slow or like dull. So because it could mean either Curse or slow, that's why it has those two effects. There you go, now you know. One thing that definitely is a weakness is Pursuit vulnerability. So although ghost types cannot be trapped by trapping moves or abilities, they can be trapped by the move Pursuit. Switching normally takes priority over everything, so you switch, new Pokemon comes in, and that Pokemon takes the incoming attack. But Pursuit actually hits you as you switch out. Not only that, but it actually gets stronger if you try and switch. So if you're facing down a Pursuit user, you're basically put into a do or die situation, probably die. Where if you stay in an attack, you die, and if you try and switch, you die. So you may as well try and attack while you can, right? For whatever reason, they removed Pursuit in Gen 8, so this doesn't really apply nowadays, but I still think it's worth mentioning. Ghosts overall, spookily good, we'll put them in A. And hey, Ghost is so good that it started its own franchise that has way better gameplay and polish than Pokemon. Don't at me. Grass type. I did make a 15-minute video about how much I hate grass, but that's for in-game. Competitive, grass is fine-ish. I mean, I still think it's on the worst side, but it's not awful by any means. If you look at the type chart, you have a zillion weaknesses, but you also have some pretty nice resistances. Offensively, it's pretty suspect. It's pretty bad, let's be real. But you do beat water types, which is nice, and specifically, grass is one of the best ways to beat the water-ground combination, which is otherwise like close to invincible. Grass has a ton of special traits, some of which are really useful. You're immune to Leech Seed, which is a really annoying move, so nice to be able to avoid that. You're immune to powder moves, which includes Spore, arguably the best move in the game, so being able to dodge that, really nice. You benefit in several ways from Sun. If you have Chlorophyll, you get faster. You can use Solar Beam without charging, although Solar Beam is still kind of risky to use. If you have Growth, you get +2/+2 in Sun. That's beefing up real fast. And Synthesis heals you for 2/3 of your health under Sun. Lots of benefits for grass under the sun. If grassy terrain is active, you gain a boost in power to your grass-type moves, and by being a grass-type, you resist Earthquake, which is a really common move, so that's nice. Grass-types actually suffer some adverse effects from non-sun weather, so Solar Beam, in addition to the charge turn, gets halved power, and Synthesis also restores less health under non-sun weather. But those are really minor points, because if you're not running those moves, then other weathers don't affect you any more than they would affect other types. Grass in competitive, it's not ass, but it's not great either. It at least escapes C thanks to all of the utility and shenanigans that you can do with the leaves. Eat your veggies, kids. Ground. Similar to electric, I think ground is one of those secret Chad types. It's actually pretty darn good. I'm gonna put it in A, right above electric. Defensively, it's nothing special. I wouldn't call it particularly good or bad, but offensively is where it really shines. Ground might actually be the best offensive type in the game. It's basically Earthquake, the type. Earthquake is pretty consistently the best offensive move in the game. 100 base power, 100 accuracy, no questions asked. Well, I mean, it does ask one question, and that's, are you a flying type? If not, you're probably gonna take a bunch of damage. If you're a ground type, that means you have stab Earthquake, so there's kind of a floor, or a ground, if you will, to how bad you can be, because at the very least, you can Earthquake things. I think it says a lot about how dominant ground type offense is that an entire type, one of the better abilities in the game, and a kind of niche item, are all dedicated to negating ground. Rotom Fan is so scared of ground that he doubled up on his immunities. You gotta stay safe. Ground type, it's coming for you. A tier. Normal type. I'm gonna throw an image on screen here. It's a picture I took at Shinjuku Station here in Tokyo yesterday. It's kind of hard to read, so I'll read it for you. It says, being normal is the best. I disagree. Normal, unfortunately, is pretty lackluster. In Generation 1, Normal was actually pretty good. I think this is what the developers intended Normal to be. It was sort of a type without many disadvantages or advantages. You could use a Normal type move and be reasonably sure you were going to do a lot of damage. Kind of like how Dragon used to be before Fairy. But then Generation 2 introduced Steel, and all the generations since have introduced more Steel types, more Rock types, more Ghost types. All of these things that put Normal at more and more of a disadvantage, and what do they get in return? Nothing. I think it's worth noting that in Generation 1, Normal type basically had no weakness because fighting was a joke, but they've since hit the gym, so nowadays there's plenty of incredibly strong fighting Pokemon with incredibly strong fighting moves just waiting to wreck your normal day. In the end, in a world of machines, fairies, and dragons, being a normal dude just doesn't cut it most of the time. But if it's any consolation, Normal is the best type ever in inverse battles. Bring those back. Poison. Poison is basically like inverse Ice, so Ice is pretty good offensively, horrible defensively. Poison is pretty good defensively and just unacceptable on offense. It's so bad. Honestly, if Fairy hadn't been added, Poison would probably be like in contention with Ice for like badness. Maybe not quite. That's a bit harsh to Poison. Defensively, again, it's fine, but really it ends up being the Steel type at home. Steel does everything that Poison does better. One of the main defensive perks of Poison is that you're immune to the Poison status. With Steel, not only are you immune to the Poison status, you're just completely immune to Poison moves. So Steel is better at being Poison than Poison. Poison at least gets some neat perks. If a Poison type uses Toxic, it will always hit, and I mean always hit. The opponent can be using Fly or Dig, and it'll still hit them. Not that anybody uses those moves in competitive anyway, but I mean, it's neat. Grounded Poison types also have the unique advantage of being able to absorb Toxic Spikes. So if your opponent sets Toxic Spikes up against your team, you can just send out your Nidoking, and poof, the spikes are gone. That's nice. Poison, it's not a meme type by any means, but don't go buying out your Pokemart stock antidotes. How about that? Psychic. I see a letter. It's after A. It's before C. It's B. Psychic goes in B. If you were there back in Gen 1, you'll remember that Psychic was the OP type. Gen 1 Mewtwo is maybe the most powerful Pokemon of all time, like in context of the other Pokemon that existed. But since then, Psychic has been brought in line. Steel and Dark were both added pretty explicitly to counter Psychic, and they've done a pretty good job of that. Nowadays, Psychic is, like, very run-of-the-mill type. It's got some advantages, got some disadvantages, got some good Pokemon, got some bad Pokemon. I really don't have much to say about it. It's weak to Pursuit. That kind of sucks. People really like Gardevoir. That's a Psychic type. Oh no, okay, we need to move on to the next type. Alright, that's enough for Psychic. Goes in B. Rock type. For a type whose entire shtick is being rock hard, they sure are easy to beat. 5 weaknesses tied with ice. What? Yeah, you can beat rock types with bubbles. You can beat them with leaves. You can beat them with swords. They might be hammers. You can beat them with ground up rocks. You can beat them with your bare fists. Like, why are rocks such wusses? Come on. At least they actually have resistances, so it's not quite as bad as ice, but it's down there. Stealth Rock, one of the most influential moves of all time, is a rock move, but you don't like get a bonus for using it as a rock type or anything. You're immune to Sandstorm, which is nice, and you get a 50% special defense boost from Sandstorm, which basically means Tyranitar gets a 50% special defense boost from Sandstorm. But hey, I like Tyranitar, I'll take stuff that makes him stronger. I could be wrong on this, but I believe there are no physical rock moves with perfect accuracy. And even if I am wrong, I know that, like, the most widely used rock move is Stone Edge, and if you've ever played competitive, you know it's called Stone Miss for a reason. It's really annoying. It's not why Rock is down here, but it's annoying. Rock, notably, is a key player in some of the worst type combinations known to Pokemon, so viewer discretion is advised. Rock Fire, Rock Ice, and Rock Steel. Oof. I mean, Rock has the power to make Steel bad. That's something. Ooh. Have I taken rock types for granted? I'm gonna say no, they're pretty bad. And last, but certainly not least, it's water. It's making a splash all the way up in S. Water is just aggressively good. Look at those defenses. Beautiful. Weak to only electric and grass, but grass is kinda so weak to electric. And offensively, not bad at all either. Rain is probably the best weather overall because it both speeds and powers you up. Because most Swift Swim users are also using the water type moves that are getting boosted by the rain. Whereas with Sun, you kind of split the bonuses between fire type attacks getting stronger and grass type chlorophyll Pokemon getting faster. I know they can use Solar Beam. Solar Beam's not that good. There's a reason why bulky water is its own archetype. It's because water types are just really hard to kill, while also being reasonably threatening on offense. It's just a great balance of defense and offense. I don't have much bad to say about water. I'm 70% water, and I suspect you are as well. You don't like where I placed water? Well, what are you gonna do about it? Please don't click off the video, I still have things to say. So that is my competitive Pokemon type tier list. I hope you enjoyed. Do you agree with my placements? Do you disagree with my placements? Let me know in the comments below, or in my Discord, link in the description. Gotta show that again, ho ho! I look forward to seeing what nitpicks you guys come up with, or, you know, actual errors, because that's a very real possibility. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you in the next video. Farewell.